Welcome to the Discover podcast, where we view faith as a discovery journey with Jesus to help you become the person God created you to be. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Discover podcast. We are officially back. This episode launches season 2. And I know that back in June, when we took a break, when we hit the pause button, a lot of you were really sad. You were really depressed. You've been anxiously awaiting the return of this podcast, all 10 of you.
It's probably the best news they've received in quite some time, that we're back.
We are back. And as you can see, we're in a different set. We're kind of experimenting with different ways to record this podcast, different sets, just to kind of do it differently, to make it comfortable, to make it easy for people who are coming and being guests with us. One of the exciting things that we're doing this year is we're expanding the reach of our podcast, specifically with the guests that we invite. This last year, we really just focused on members of our church, people to come. We created this podcast to kind of hold space for people in our church to tell their stories this last year. And this year, we want to kind of expand the reach of that and get people from other parts of the world. And we have, through the hard work of Monty, who's behind the camera. You can't see him right now, but he's the one who's he's really making all of this happen. The reason we have the ability to do this podcast is because of his expertise. I mean, he's figured out a way for us to Zoom people in, if you will.
I think he invented it.
I think he did. I think that's what he did.
Yep.
And we're really excited to bring different guests, different voices onto the podcast this year and just have an opportunity to get to hear stories from people who are doing unique things all over the country, maybe even all over the world. Yeah. And so the theme or the focus of this season, we're saying it's on the move. Like, the assumption is God is on the move in your life, and we want to hear those stories of how God is on the move in your life. And this really also kind of comes in conjunction with what we did last season, launching this initiative that we called Storytellers. We launched it for our church. We also started this podcast just holding space for people to tell their stories, and just as a way to bring it back to the forefront of our mind. Jake, why don't you give just a little summary of kind of what that initiative was all about?
Yeah, so Storytellers starts with the idea that God is always at work in our lives. He's always speaking to us, and we need to be aware and attuned to really what he's doing and then how we respond to it. And then kind of stepping from that is understanding that story of how he's at work to a point where we can articulate it to the people around us. So seeing how God is at work, and then ultimately being able to share that with other people.
Yeah. So the anchor point for the Storytellers initiative at our church was Psalm 107, verse 2, that says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story." And so we believe that you have a story to tell. You have a story from what God has done in your life. Maybe that's bringing you to faith or things that have happened in your past. But we also believe that you have a story that's in real time, currently being written by the Lord and you, and participating with his work in your life. And so a lot of what we want to do as a church and with this podcast, specifically in this season, is just hold space still for people to articulate how they see God at work, how they're responding to where God is at work in their life, so that we as people can become aware of how to follow God's leading. And so before we started recording, Jake and I were just talking about different spaces in our own life where we are sensing and we are wondering where God might be on the move, and how we're engaging with that. Because I think one of the realities of discerning where and how God is on the move is that at some level you don't always in real time have 100% clarity and certainty. Yeah. So say more about that, either from, kind of like a theoretical vantage point, or even from your own life, how you think through, like, okay, maybe this is what God is doing, or maybe God is working here, but I don't necessarily yet know 100% for sure.
Well, I think the reality with any story is there's like a beginning, middle, and end. Mm-hmm. Most of the time we're in the beginning or middle of things. And so I think we often can tell what happened when we get to the end of something, but a lot of times we're just sitting in the middle of something, wondering if there's anything happening there. And so I think that could be just in a season of your life where there's like struggle going on, or different things you're processing with the Lord, or just mundane everyday walk with the Lord. And then all of a sudden, 3 months later, you look back and you think, wow, he was actually doing quite a bit in my life at that period of time. But it's hard to notice it in the beginning. It's probably like working out. You don't really notice the benefits or the gains till later. You're not like, the day you start working out, you're not like, wow, I'm in way better shape.
Right.
but you look back on it. And I think our spiritual life is a lot like that.
Yeah. 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 That's a good analogy from the standpoint of like growth is slow and steady. You could also compare it to when you plant something in the ground. If you just plant a seed, you're like, after a few weeks, you're like, I don't know if anything's happening. Like, I don't know if there's anything going on there, but you know that there's all kinds of stuff at work underneath the soil. And then eventually something does pop up. And so as we think about our relationship with God, we've said multiple times that in John 5:15 through 17, somewhere around there, Jesus says in a conversation with the Pharisees, while they are questioning him about why he's healing on the Sabbath, he says, my Father is always at work. Yep. And so to this day, I too am always at work. And so our bedrock assumption as a church and on this podcast is that God is always present and he's always at work in your life. To frame it in the language of this podcast season, he is always on the move. And so we want to help you discern and figure out how to pay attention to where God is on the move, ultimately, so that you can participate.
Yeah, it makes me think of the passage where Jesus is talking about the Spirit and saying he will go wherever he wills.
Yeah.
Like we don't always even know where God is taking us. Like he's on the move. It's not us like just bringing him along with us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what can make this idea of this season so fun, because a lot of times we're just not even anticipating what he's doing.
Yeah. And then sometimes you just have these moments of you're like, oh, like that's what he's up to. But I think you only really have those moments. I mean, sometimes it's just so obvious, even if you're not looking for God, like, okay, that's God. But as you're looking, as you're aware, as you're practicing paying attention, you're just that much more open, ready, and eager. And you probably see things more readily than when you're not paying attention. Now, what we would do to kind of kick this off is just talk about a few spaces in our own lives where we are practicing paying attention. It doesn't necessarily mean that we've identified that, oh, God is doing something in this area of my life. But we've had this sense, this seems like a place where God could be at work. And so I'm going to practice paying attention here. And the question is, well, what does it look like? We say that a lot. We want you to practice paying attention. Well, what does that look like? So let's start with naming for you. What is the area, or two, what are the areas in your life where you are in real time asking the question, is God up to something here? And what could it be?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones, if you're around me enough, is youth sports. Mm-hmm. I've got a 12-year-old son who is playing sports constantly, a 10-year-old daughter who plays volleyball. Mm-hmm. And it's what does it look like in those spaces? In a space that can honestly be really frustrating. Youth sports take over our lives at times, but it's what is God doing if I'm going to be here? In some ways, it's even like trusting that God can redeem where we are. Like that this could be a really beneficial place, not just for my kids to play sports, but like how could God use, like if we're present in this space and not just there to have him play a sport and then to leave, but what does it look like to actually be available to God? Like, how would you use me in this space? So that's probably one of my main spaces right now.
Yeah. So do you have any examples of so we talked about baseball season is over in some ways, like you finished it.
Kind of.
But maybe. Then you said before we started recording, oh no, it's already started again. So tell us what that means and how are you actually entering into that space right now in real time, trying to pay attention?
So baseball, we joke at the beginning of the baseball season, like, oh, it's our summer family. We're back to hanging out with you 2 to 3 times every week and going on summer trips even with But I think one of the things it's been looking at, how can we be intentional with these relationships that we're building? And even last Saturday, Elijah and I went to a football game with one of his baseball players and we sat with the parents and talked with them because they become our friends. And how do we engage in relationship with people? We had a meeting last night, 2 nights ago, for our upcoming baseball season. So in September, we're having meetings for the baseball season that's coming up next summer. And they're introducing the coaches. So a little bit of 2 years ago, I made the decision to start coaching, which was going to take more time, but it felt like this is where I can actually engage with some of the kids. And the head coach, I've shared this before, but the head coach told everyone, like, Jake's not really even one of our coaches. He's more a counselor for our kids. That's who I am. And one of the parents even said, he's actually that for us too, to be able to have those kind of conversations. Right. So to be present in this place of like, how can I engage these kids as they walk through, which to them, things that feel like the end of the world. striking out in a big point in a game for a 12-year-old is like the biggest thing. But to parents to figure out how to process, how do I parent my kid in these hard times? And I think that's where it kind of connects with even this idea of storytellers. Like
Yeah.
I've been sharing often, my stories are areas I failed in trying to parent my kids or ways that I've just seen God show up. In having a conversation with my son Elijah after one of his games and being able to use that as kind of this is part of the story that God has in my life. He's
Yeah.
helping me like parent my children through
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah. So in that one example, you have a handful of things. Like there's some layers of things of like, what does it mean to pay attention to where God is at work? So it's not just that God is at work to do things for you, but it's this idea of having a missional vantage point where we can participate with God as he might be trying to do things in other people's
Yeah.
lives. So we just started working through the book of Acts as a church. And part of why we're um, focusing on this idea of on the move and God on the move is because as a church study through the book of Acts, we're going to see that God is clearly on the move in the book of Acts. And part of why and what he's doing through the Spirit and with the message of the gospel is to bring redemption to the people of Israel and beyond, to the ends of the earth, he says. So I think it's important for us to name that when we think about participating with God and what he's doing in the world, in part, a big part, is to be a missional presence in people's lives to bear witness to the redeeming work of God. Because that's what Jesus says right before he ascends to the Father, you will be my witness. The reason I'm sending the Spirit, the reason I'm going away is so that you can be a witness to me and what I've done in your life and extend that to other people.
Yeah. I mean, and I think when we think about this, when we hear the word witnessing, like if you've been around the church, to you, that means like going up to somebody like coldly and just being like, have you ever like followed Jesus or
Right.
something like that? But I think, and I'm all for that. If that's how God is calling you to reach out to people, go do it. But most of our opportunities to witness are going to be from the people we're living life right around. And I think one of the spaces, we're going to talk about these different spaces we're in. I don't go into the baseball season thinking, oh, this is my project. I'm going to make sure that by the end of this summer, everybody has heard about Jesus. I would love for that to be true. But I'm also just going to be present with them. I'm going to be a faithful friend to them. But it makes me think a lot about how do I respond to a bad call?
Yeah.
How do I respond when I'm frustrated about things that are happening? That has challenged me a lot.
Yeah.
Because if I want to be a witness to who Jesus is, I want that to be fruit in my life that they see. And then it's apologizing when it doesn't come out the right way. And I think a lot of being a witness has been that too. There have been these really sweet conversations where I've gotten to engage. But it's also just been how do we live our lives? And I'm sure that's true for you in some of the spaces that God puts you in as well.
Yeah, because I think that what our world is looking for in general, and specifically within the scope of Christianity, is they're looking for authenticity. So people, I think, want to be in relationship with the real version of you, not the propaganda version of your Christian self, right? Like, hey, I have this job to do. I've got to go get X number of people into the kingdom and I've got this mission. No, like people want relationship with you. I think when we are more authentic in wanting relationship with other people, those conversations just start to naturally happen. But sometimes we can actually be intentional in bringing them about. And so like I have right now in my mind, I'm thinking about a few people. I'm like, I wonder if I were to go up to them because they know I'm a pastor. And sometimes that feels like it puts a barrier between like me and other people, and they're like, oh. And even though I'm getting to know them, we hang out from time to time, but it feels weird and artificial to somehow slip into a conversation, spiritual things. The thing that I'm thinking of right now is like, I wonder if I could go to these people who I hang out with, spend time with, because like you, it may not be baseball for me, but it's soccer on the soccer field with our kids, to say, hey, would you be curious and would you be interested in just having a spiritual conversation with me? Because what I'm curious in is how people in our community perceive God. And I'm just looking for people to open up that dialogue with. I have no agenda. I'm not trying to force anything. I would just love to know what you think about God, your faith, if you have faith in spiritual things. So I've done that with one person so far. I have a couple other people in mind I want to ask that question to. And it feels to me like, so that's an authentic way of entering into a conversation with somebody that doesn't feel like pushy or forceful or like in some way I'm trying to be something other than who I really am.
Yeah, and I think what it's going to take is sometimes just learning how to ask good questions. Like you said, like, I'm curious about this. I'd love to get your idea. I do think there's different styles of witnessing or evangelism, whatever term you use, that are going to be like more apologetics driven, like defense of the faith. But I don't often see that in my natural relationships. Like in these people that I'm around, that's not often what I use. It's just asking questions and then asking the question, could I share my perspective of that? Because when you allow people to share, like they're so much more, I don't even have to ask that question. Sometimes they'll just ask me what I think. But there is this sense of like God being on the move, I have to follow.
Right.
And I think our tendency right now, because of how we think people view the church or Christians, we don't always want to follow into that next part. I'll be authentic. I'll ask you questions. Sometimes I think even our authenticity is like cynicism. We're like, oh, and the church is bad. Like there are all these struggles and like we're negative, overly negative because we think that's going to like open this door. If you don't turn the corner to why it's beautiful,
right?
Like,
it really is.
What was the point of that? Like, hey, if the church is really bad, and then you just stop there. No, it's like, here's why Jesus is beautiful. Here's why we follow him. And I think that gets into the storyteller's idea that this story is being written in all of our lives that we can share with other people. Like my example of just how God is helping me parent is part of the story of my life, because I don't think I'd be a great dad without Jesus. Like I think he has helped me a lot in how I parent. And so I think like, how do we turn the corner to actually bring the beauty of Jesus into these conversations?
Yeah. So one of the things that got me thinking about, hey, how can I invite people into spiritual conversations in a way that feels authentic and real and non-threatening, was actually Wes Huff. Do you know who Wes Huff? He's an apologist from Canada. I think a younger guy. I think in his mid-30s.
Yeah, he's not very old.
Yeah, and he was on a podcast with, I don't know, 4 comedians. I don't even know their names.
Okay.
Have you seen this?
I've only seen the one with him on Joe Rogan. I saw clips of that, but I haven't seen anything else.
So he was on Joe Rogan, which is probably a 2-hour conversation. And Joe Rogan at times was a comedian. I think now he's just a podcaster. But there's another podcast. Monty, do you know what I'm talking about? What's the name of it? Do you remember? You can look it up. So it's like a 2-hour conversation. He's in the midst of this, this group of comedians, and the conversation they're having is fascinating because they're like asking real questions to Wes about stuff, but it just felt so real, so authentic. There's good challenge both ways, good questions both ways. And from a standpoint of like, here's what it looks like to have good, robust, non-threatening, offensive, non-accusatory spiritual conversation. I watched that as like, do that. Like I should be able to invite people into that conversation and be able to, just like dialogue about like, what do you think about these things? And I don't really have a huge opinion. Yeah, that's it. What is that? Yeah, Andrew Schultz. Is it what's the name? Flagrant Podcast. Yeah. So if you are watching this or listening to this and you go look for the Flagrant Podcast with Andrew Schultz when he interviews Wes Huff, just know that there's some language in it because these guys are not Christian. It's not, you may not want to listen to it with kids in the car or whatever. But it was fascinating because here's this guy who has a profound faith in Jesus. Really, like he's dedicated his entire life to defending the faith. And here he is in the midst of guys who I have no idea what their, faith background is, and have a real honest conversation. And so in my life right now, the place where I'm asking that question of what does it look like for me to be aware of where and how God is on the move is at the gym where I go. And if you come to church here, you've probably started to hear me tell stories of like just things that are happening at the gym because I'm really seeking to pay attention. Like how can I be a faithful presence to God at this place? And I'm not showing up with like tracts, handing people tracts on why Jesus loves them. I'm not even,
because they wouldn't have anywhere to put it.
I'm not even necessarily at this point inviting people to our church. Maybe it comes to that, but I'm just asking like, how can I be present here? And how can I be aware of the stories of these people's lives so that I can just be a faithful witness to God in this space? So one of the things we're doing tonight, real time tonight, not tomorrow night.
Not me and you.
No,
you
tonight.
And someone.
Me, yeah. So there's this guy who's at our gym who started doing comedy sports. I guess the comedy sports place downtown has these classes where you can take like an 8-week class and learn how to do improv. And then by the end of that 8 weeks, you put on a little showcase, like invite your family and friends to show what you have learned.
So you're going to the showcase.
Totally. And this guy is in his early 60s. He's incredible. He's amazing. I look at him, I'm like, I want to be like him when I'm in my early 60s, because he's still doing new things. He's stretching himself. He's taking risks. He's doing something that potentially could make him look uncomfortable or look weird, because comedy doesn't always work out if you're learning it. And so I think there's some other people from the gym going as well. But I was like, this is me trying to pay attention. Like, how can I be present in these people's lives? How can I be present to who God is and what he's put in me? And how can I just be faithfully who I am in this place to maybe have an opportunity to point people to Jesus? And so as we look at this idea of on the move, I think part of it is practicing paying attention. And that starts with curiosity. It starts with saying like, yeah, like what if, or what could be, or what is God doing? And then from there, it's also just being willing to engage in that, whether that's building a relationship, whether that's, serving somebody in a specific capacity, and trying to practice and experiment with engaging with how God is at work.
And I think one of the things that can happen is we talk about God being on the move, our story. But if we can actually believe that God is on the move in other people's lives, God is doing something in their life at the same time. Like, we're not like making this all happen.
Yes.
Like, you're not making the guy at your gym go to a comedy club. Like, this is like stuff that God's doing in their life where you get to connect to what he's doing. You get to connect pieces that maybe they can't see, or they don't even attribute it to God of how he's at work. And I think that, to me, in my life in general, when it comes to talking to other people about Jesus, when I believe that the Spirit who's at work in my life, writing this story, the Spirit who's on the move, is also at work in other people's lives.
100%.
Even people who don't know the Lord yet, the Spirit is at work in their life. It takes a lot of pressure off me. And it also makes me believe that, this could actually happen. Like, something could come from this. Like, there could be some great conversation. I just think our default most of the time is people don't want to hear about this. And I don't know. I think the more I actually step out and have a conversation with people, the more I'm like, people really do want to talk about this. I don't get very many people who are like, nope. Maybe it's like it goes for like a minute. And then we change the subject onto something else. I'm okay with that. But it's very rare that it's hostile. And for some reason, we think that's what it's going to be. But yet, if God is moving on both sides of the equation, I think that helps us a lot.
Yeah, God everywhere we go, and he's there before we got there. Right. So he is, in the same way, I like the way you put that, in the same way that we say God is present and at work in our life, I think that's true of everybody else's life. He's doing things. So all we have to do is come alongside and hopefully just set the table for people a little bit differently. So maybe they say like, oh yeah, how about that? I've never thought about it like that before, and just help them pay attention as well. So I think, just to kind of summarize, as we kind of wrap this first episode up and really name, like, so what do we mean when we say God is on the move in our life? Sometimes that looks like God might actually move us in a different direction. In the same way, last season, we talked about your story, becoming a pastor here, and that shift from one job to another. Sometimes that's God on the move in our lives. Sometimes it's just God opening our eyes to how he's at work in different spaces in our own life, whether that's on the baseball field or at the gym. And then other times it's God developing something within us. So like our own personal growth. So not that long ago, somebody asked if I would go have coffee with them. And my initial response was like, okay. And then, like I've started recently doing, I think it's called Lectio 365. It's a prayer app by the 24/7 Prayer Network. It's like a 10-minute thing in the morning. It's been really good. Becky's been doing it for a long time. And I've just needed something to kind of like kickstart my time with the Lord as we come into this next season. And this morning was on this idea of God being love. And I just found myself like, what does it look like for me to love people when I don't always want to spend time with people? Whether it's because I need a break, my introverted side is coming out, or whatever. But that was just a moment for me to like, there's still things in my own life where I have these growth areas that I have to attend to. So when we talk about God being on the move, I think it's those three things. God may be actually moving you somewhere else, God doing something in somebody else's life, and you participating in that, or God developing something and growing you in a certain way.
Yeah.
Would you add anything to that list?
No, I think those are probably the three. I think the reality is how they work together, like a lot of the times, like what God's doing internally in me. Like I am an introvert by nature, so I often do not want to go hang out with people.
Which sometimes is always a surprise when people find out people who work at a church are introverts. I think
we just spend all our
extroverts.
energy on them. But then so God has got to convict me. Like, this is not how I called you to love people. Like, you actually have to be around people to love them. And so I'm going through that, but then I step out and actually get around people. And then those opportunities for him to move and work are happening. Or he's working on me in my parenting, the times where I get too angry, that's going on. But I then take the step to actually be honest with people about that part of my life. And it opens up this whole new depth of relationship with them because they're struggling with the same thing.
Yeah.
And so we see these things kind of work together. They're not like a separate compartment of like, God is on the move on the really big things where you change the whole trajectory of your life. Anyone who's willing to do that, to hear God, to take that huge step, they've been listening to God in those little things before that. If they haven't, I wouldn't trust that big step.
Yeah.
And so just being able to see that, how these all play together. Yeah, you want to trust that he's at work in your life. And then as you go out, you're going to have more trust that he's at work in the lives of the other people that you're engaging with. And so I think that's the part that's so helpful to me, because the more I'm listening to him, the more I'm probably going to be aware of conversations I can step into or relationships that I can further.
Yeah. So as we kind of bring this first episode to a close, I think hopefully that clearly previews for people kind of where we're headed in this season. We'd also love to hear from anybody who's listening or watching, like where and how are you seeing God on the move in your own life? What is he stirring? Where is he leading you? What sort of, questions are you wrestling with? What areas of your life are you practicing paying attention to? I have a friend who says we are all called to be divine detectives. We're all supposed to be looking for where is God at work in my life and how can I participate with him? And so we would love to hear those stories from you. So feel free to reach out, let us know, drop a line. You can respond to anywhere you're listening to this episode or watching it. So whether that's Facebook or YouTube or Spotify or wherever else, just drop us a line and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. And we'd love to hear that and have a conversation with you about it. Until next time, have a great day.